Just over a month after schools returned to full-time in-person classes after a third round of lockdown closures, the pressure is on and teachers expected to deliver the learning and to support stressed and anxious learners are themselves exhausted and at risk of burnout. After 18 months of on-again, off-again, rotational and remote schooling, the South African education system has lost ground. Some learners are up to, one school year behind, and up to 500,000 have dropped out altogether. Amidst reports of rising levels of anxiety and depression in children and teenagers, mental health professionals warn against neglecting the well-being of teachers too. They say teachers are expected to be able to provide psychological support to the struggling and traumatized learners, but are struggling to cope mentally themselves. For more on the challenges facing teachers during COVID-19, we're now joined by Dr. Aneshree Moodley, member of the South African Society of Psychiatrists. Dr. Moodley, very good evening to you. Thank you so much for joining us. Welcome to the Globe. Just how prevalent is the issue of mental health on teachers amid the COVID-19 pandemic?
Good evening, and thank you very much for having me on. Absolutely. I think teachers are a population that has been neglected in terms of forerunners or the people that are at the forefront of this pandemic. So yes, they are being faced with several challenges in terms of COVID, as well as with managing all the different changes, the virtual platform now used for teaching, as well as their own challenges that have come with COVID. So therefore, there are definitely higher rates of anxiety and depression seen amongst our educators today.
To get a sense that teachers get the necessary support in terms of, mental health support and as well as all other forms of support?
No, I don't. If that question was, do I get a sense that teachers get enough support? No, I definitely don't. I think that teachers are by far a neglected population. I think that we focused, especially within South Africa, perhaps in my opinion anyway, the focus has been on transitioning to the virtual platform for teaching rather than checking in on the psychological well-being of teachers. And I think that has been to the detriment of our learners as well.
And having said that, Dr. Moodley, do you think that, that lack of psychological support on teachers will rub off on the learners? Will it not perhaps affect the quality of their work?
Absolutely. There have been countless studies, and in fact another recent one that was published that showed that there's a very, very intimate relationship between the teacher and the learner, and that the psychological well-being and behavior of the teacher can directly predict the emotional well-being of the students and their commitment and ability to engage with the study material. And this sort of makes sense as well from a psychological or psychiatric perspective, because we are aware that teachers spend enormous hours per day with learners, and therefore inadvertently, consciously or unconsciously fall into a role of caregiver or a parental role to learners, and therefore learners can pick up on psychological distress or unease or anxiety and will reflect that back to their environment. So it will definitely impact negatively on their ability to study.
And research shows that high stress can trigger symptoms of anxiety and depression. But can those two conditions be interlinked?
Depression and anxiety, absolutely. Absolutely, if that is your question.
Yes.
So absolutely. In fact, we find that in a lot of cases, anxiety or worries, so stresses, may lead, if they're overwhelming and they're left without care and attention, so someone is not addressing those anxieties, they might eventually spill over into depressive feelings, so feelings of hopelessness, feelings of not being able to change one's environment or circumstances, and eventually spill over or grow and develop into a depressive episode.
Are teachers embracing the possibility of, this being the new norm, that will be continuing with this trajectory for a very long time, and some of the schools in particular, deciding that they will take learning totally online? Are teachers ready for that possibility?
I think that's where the difficulty arises, because in order to answer your question, I would say no, firstly. And the reason is because we have such a spectrum of education facilities, shall I say, within South Africa. You know, we have the private education system and then we have the state education system. And even within those two arenas, there's significant variety from city to city and province to province. And we are a very large country. So no, I don't think that teachers as a category, holistically, are ready for this transition. I think that teachers, where they have been fortunate enough to be afforded the resources, personally, as well as within the school, the actual education facility, if they've been afforded resources and the learners themselves are also able to access resources for a virtual platform, then that is going great. And I think more people are geared, both the teachers as well as the learners are geared to move and perhaps a more long-term rather than a short-term basis to using interchangeably in-person and virtual platforms for studying. However, when we look at resource-poor environments, then that is not the case. It is simply practically not the case. And that adds further burden to both the teacher wanting to try and support this child and allay their fears, but also trying to manage their own anxiety at not being able to perhaps reach students who do not have resources to access virtual platforms.
And I suppose it's safe to say at this particular point that, parents, need to juggle. I mean, they undergo what is now known as, double jeopardy, for lack of a better word, because they need to juggle parental mental health, because at the end of the day, some of the teachers are parents, and then they have to juggle their school job. I mean, taking care of the lives of children at school. And this is a huge burden on them, isn't it?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, if we look at it from the learner's perspective, yes, we are all part of a very complex world and we each have very different roles. So as a learner, yes, you're a learner at school, but you could also be the child of a teacher who might very well be very stressed out, being exposed to COVID on a, regular basis, needing to have long work hours to try and evolve to that virtual platform. And then to be a teacher, an educator as well, you have many roles, you wear many hats. So having to juggle all these different roles can add to your levels of stress and possibly your risk of burnout.
So what would you advise teachers then at this point, I mean, to take care of their mental health and to ensure that they are as strong as they possibly can for both their children and the learners as well?
So the first thing that we at SADAC or at SASOC, the South African Association of Psychiatry, would recommend is put your own oxygen mask on first. And by that we mean, I think teachers need to recognize and acknowledge, so take that step of courage to acknowledge that they are possibly more susceptible to anxiety or they're experiencing symptoms of anxiety or depression. And the second thing would be to decide if they are willing to ask for help. So go and ask for help. Acknowledge how you're feeling and ask for help, whether that is through your social support system, through your church, or through the mental health facilities that either you can access via state or via private. Then you need to do that. And then second, another, second sort of tier of self-care would be exactly that, self-care. So looking at managing one's stress better in a more conscious manner. So practicing taking long walks or practicing yoga or just being mindful, so just when you're doing an activity, do it with your mind fully present in that activity. So avoid multitasking and doing several things at once, because that usually, studies have shown that usually increases stress and the risk of burnout.
And might I add that we need to adopt this culture of check-ins, checking on each other and recognizing that some teachers need more support than the others.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Each of us are individuals with our own personality structure, our own vulnerabilities, family stresses, personal stresses, as well as work stresses. So 100%, I agree with you.
All right, Dr. Moodley, lovely chatting to you. Thank you so much for your time.
You're welcome.